dedicated to intelligent energy solutions for isolated territories. I am Sébastien Dalmas. I'm a partner at Edenway. We are a French and Spanish company, expert in sustainable and innovative projects. Today we have a wonderful panel of speakers coming from France and the UK that I would like to briefly introduce. We have Hélène Morin from the Development and Innovation Agency of the Bretagne region in France. We have Gwendal Wonk from the Energy and Equipment Association of Municipalities of the Departement de Finistère in France. We also have Phédeas Stephanides from the University of East Anglia. And we have Helen Smith and Peter Connor from the University of Exeter. And finally, we have Jonathan Williams from Morin, Southeast in the UK. Today, we will do many things with you. So I hope you will stay focused because we have lots of information to share with you. First of all, we will introduce you the ICE project. Then we will go through the Ushant case study and actually its genesis, its history, the experimentations we are doing here, the scenario development associated to the methodology that has been designed. And finally, we will address the citizen participation on the island. And before concluding, we will give you an overview of the innovative approach as well as the value proposition we've developed for other islands. So as I've said, we have lots of things to tell you, so I will let Hélène directly introduce the ICE project.
Thank you, Sébastien. So I am Hélène Morin. I am the head of the European Affairs Department at the Regional Development Agency of Brittany. And I am the coordinator of the ICE project. We are going to make a presentation for you today. So first of all, the ICE project is gathering 9 partners. It is a 4 years long project. It started in 2017 and will end next year. And the global budget of the project is 8 million euros. Just to give you an overview on the place where the project is implemented. So it is implemented between France and UK. So here in the red circle, you have a specific channel, the channel area, which is called channel area. And more precisely, here you have the information and the name of the different partners we are working with. So it is a combination of universities which are providing new knowledge on the smart grids and all the different aspects for the renewable energy. And we also have partners dealing with companies that support the implementation of the new technologies and find new solutions for the markets. The ICE project is really focusing on isolated communities that are facing the same challenges, the energy challenges, and more specifically, in fact, what we are looking for is to use the local renewable energy available close to the area we are focusing on and to drive it and to make it less expensive compared to the fuel one, which is more used at the moment. What we also look for is to improve the reliability of the energy system, which is less reliable on the isolated community today, in fact, compared to the mainland one. What kind of approach have we decided to take? In fact, it is a combination of actions throughout the entire energy cycle. It means that we cover different brick, from production, storage, and consumptions, because we believe that it is on working on these different aspects that the impact of the new implementation or the new solutions will be better. If we focus only on one or on the other part at the local level, the impact will be less than expected. In fact, we also have decided to implement and test a solution on 2 different areas. The first one is the Ushant Island, and this is the case that will be detailed today to you. And here you have some pictures from these islands. We have a lot of different kind of consumption, for instance, a high level of consumption from the lighthouse, for instance, and we also have a spread out inhabitants all over the territories that we have to give some electricity, and we have to make sure that the electricity is available. The other case that we are dealing with is, or the other demonstration site is completely different. It is the East Anglia campus with a population of students which who have different needs compared to the Ushant inhabitants, for instance. And the idea is really to focus on two different types of populations and see how we can improve these two kinds of isolated territories and offer accurate solution to these two type of population. And really the idea of the project is to test new solutions, to improve the system, and also to invest and make sure that what we have designed is also implemented and is applied to the island and isolated territories. What are the two targets that we are focused on? First, we are focusing on companies that are offering innovative solutions all over the different parts of the system. I mean production, storage, and consumption. For instance, we have such kind of solution or sensors, for instance. At the moment, we have 24 companies registered or identified as offering a specific solution. It is still open, so if you know any solution that could match with the specific needs of these isolated territories, please feel free to contact us. We also focus on isolated territories willing to improve their energy system. It could be islands, for instance, and as the case that we are going to present, but it could be also campus. I said before, it could be ports, for instance. It could be different areas that are really willing to manage its energy system and provide the consumer the more appropriate solution. Now, in fact, we are nearly at the end of the project. We still have 1 year remaining to implement different actions. And what we want to do in the coming months and for the last year of the project is to share our experiences with others and to discuss solutions and also the model and see how we can cooperate when we face the same challenges. I thank you, and I'm still available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Hélène, for this introduction to the ICE project. I will give the word to Gwenda Albon for the first part of the second part. In the meantime, I just want to tell you that we have opened a poll on the website just to better understand who you are. If you are a company, a public authority, NGO, university, I mean, if you can participate to the poll, we'll be happy to know better who you are. Thank you very much. And Gwenda, I'll let you for the second part.
Hello, everyone. So, sorry. Yeah. So, hello, everyone. My name is Gwenda Vonk. I'm project manager at the SDEF. The SDEF is the Energy and Equipment Association of Municipalities of the Finistère, France. Just to explain, the Finistère is a French administrative area, also referred as department. The historical action of the SDEF is to manage and develop the electricity network owned by the municipalities. And lately, the SDEF is developing projects for municipalities, such as renewable installation or energy management actions in public buildings. I'm in charge of the ICE project for the SDEF, and I make the link with the Mayor of Ushant and manage the achievement of the ICE actions on the island. So my presentation is about the island of Ushant, one of the experimental sites of the ICE project. I will first of all give you some background information about the island and the genesis of the energy transition currently operational within the island. I will then present the global approach of the energy transition, which conducted to the current ICE project. Peter Connor and Helen Smith from the University of Exeter, England, will present the scenario development, and the fourth part will be presented by Phédeas Stephanides from the University of East Anglia, England. So, what are the key elements of the Ushant Island? The island is located about 25 kilometers to the west of mainland France, and you can see on the middle satellite map the Finistère area outlined in red and the orange circle displaying Ushant. The island surface area is about 15 square kilometers, and one of the main characteristics of the island is that it is not electrically connected to the continental grid and possesses its own microgrid. The Ushant population reaches 862 permanent inhabitants for almost 500 households. The population density is around 60 inhabitants per square kilometer. The working population accounts for a third of the population, and the age distribution analysis shows that the population have a high share of people older than 60. Regarding buildings, the island counts a total of 1,000 residences with a high share of secondary residents, and most of the residents are individual houses. Ushant welcomes around 150,000 tourists per year, which results in a daily population of up to 3,000 persons per day in summer. There are 180 tourist accommodations for a total of 2,300 beds. There are around 500 vehicles on the island with a driven distance of only 2,000 kilometers per year per vehicles, resulting in a total annual mileage of 1 million kilometers per year. Regarding the energy context, as isolated territories, Ushant needs to import fuel oil for electricity production, around 1,600 tons per year, but also fuel oil for heating purposes of large buildings. Vehicle fuels need to be imported too, and to a lesser extent, wood and gas bottles are also imported for heating purposes. On the other hand, the island needs to export all municipal wastes. And as there is no gas grid nor heat network, the main energy vector is electricity. Therefore, the energy transition on Ushant is currently mainly focused on electricity. With an oceanic climate and near the 48° north line of latitude, the temperature varies along the year, resulting in a high seasonal variations, as can be seen on the left-hand side. This graphic shows the monthly electric consumption over a 7-year period. We can clearly see the winter peak and the smaller one, summer peak. One of the particularities of the microgrid of the island is that until 2016, it was only based on fuel oil generators. In order to ensure the security of the electricity supply, there are redundant generators, resulting in a high production cost, around 400 euro per megawatt hour, while it is around 60 euro per megawatt hour in France. In France, there is a standardization of the electricity tariff for citizens all over the territory. As a result, and although electricity production cost is higher in Ushant than in mainland France, the inhabitants of Ushant pay electricity the same as the ones on the mainland. As other energy sources such as wood, gas or oil represent an additional cost to the overall energy bill, the main heating devices on Ushant are electric heaters. In parallel, the age distribution of the households shows a high proportion of old buildings. As a result, the residential sector represents 70% of the electric consumption, 40% of which is used for heating purposes. This shows the importance of improving the energy efficiency of residential properties. The following timeline is a good visual way to understand the genesis of the energy transition of Ushant. In the early 2000s, the French network operator and electric producer EDF needed to replace some generating capacity. In 2005, new fuel oil generators were implemented. In 2010, the Association of Ponant Island, which federates 15 islands on the French west coast, started to reflect on the energy transition needs of 3 non-connected islands, Saint, Morin, and Ushant, all part of the Finistère department. They are the island in the green circle. In 2012, a first program called General Interest Program was set up to help undertake house renovating activities with a financial and technical support to the property owners. This program has been renewed and is still in operation today. In 2015, the Association of the Island was granted by 2 regional and national programs, the Local Energetic Loop on the regional level and the Positive Energy Territory for Green Growth on the national level, for a total of €600,000 to benefit to the islands of Finisterre. These programs led to actions such as the replacement of streetlights by LED bulb and promotional campaigns for inhabitants and visitors. On the right, there is an example of sticker distributed to hostel and other tourism accommodations. As a result of these 2 programs, the energy consumption and therefore the CO2 emission decreased by 25% within the 3 non-connected islands. In 2016, as part of the new French governmental energy multi-annual program for the period 2018-2023, the islands set ambitious strategic objectives for their transition, aiming to reach 100% renewable by 2030, with a first milestone at 50% by 2023. Beside these initiatives was a European Interreg-funded project called MERIFIC, which aimed to identify specific opportunities and issues faced by peripheral and island communities in exploiting marine renewable energy resources. Ushant was one of the pilot sites of the project. The outcome of this initial project brought the idea of a tidal turbine for Ushant. This in turn led to a new funding application for the ICE project to look further into the development and implementation of innovative energy production solutions for isolated territories. A 250 kilowatt tidal turbine is currently tested during the ICE project, and it could technically develop up to 1 megawatt. In 2017, the first renewable plant in Ushant was installed, and it is a 54 kilowatt photovoltaic installation on the sports hall roof, contributing to save every year more than 20,000 liters of fuel. I will now present you the overall approach to reach 100% renewable energy on the island, and more particularly the role of the ICE project in developing a smart grid on Ushant. The historical view of electric supply is that the consumption controls the production. The power plant has to ensure the stability and the quality of the energy, as well as be able to respond to high loads. When the production is based on different renewable energy sources, which are barely or not controllable, there is a need to radically redesign the supply system. For Ushant, the implementation of new renewable capacities goes along with the implementation of an energy management system, or EMS, at the EDF power plant. In this configuration, the power plant still has to respond to the load, even though the use of smart meters allow EDF to have a little space for maneuver, as they can reduce the maximum power demand, as well as allotted the load in order to smooth it. In practice, they make 10 groups of 50 households and can defer the off-peak period for each group. Then, instead of having 500 hot water boiler turning on simultaneously, there is a new group of 50 households turning on every 5 minutes, one adding to the other. Hence, there is a reduction in the peak demand. The purpose of the ICE project is to implement a communication network based on low-range radio transmission, which uses the LoRa technology. This network will allow the transmission of information in both directions, from the production toward the load using informative connected objects, and from the load toward the production with the use of sensors and consumption monitoring. Among the whole activity plan of the energy transition of Ushant, I will talk to you today about 2 specific actions included in the ICE project. The first one relates to a communication interface displaying a range of color in relation to grid status of Ushant. The idea is to give a simple and efficient information. Green means high renewable production and low consumption. Red means low renewable and high consumption. And white, this is somewhere in between. We aim to experiment 2 types of this object. The first one on the left is simply displaying the color, and the second one on the right displaying more detailed information relating to the household's consumption. With this signal, the population can choose to consume at the best period, but it only affects consumptions from washing machine, dryer, oven, etc. But with these technical bricks, the population can actively participate to the adaptability of the grid. The second action is called exemplary public buildings, and the idea is to add connected switches to electric heaters and hot water boilers in order to allow a planification of consumption, as well as remote control. A schedule will be filled by a building's user. Based on the schedule, the consuming device are automatically turned off or on. And if this infrastructure is broadly deployed on the island, the schedules could be transmitted to the production in order to forecast the consumption. And this infrastructure could also contribute to consumption erasure with a signal from the production asking to shut down in peak period. However, these two actions need some studies and tests that should be done in 2021. These two actions are currently under call for tenders and should be implemented on the island in January 2021. And they will contribute to the beginning of a smart grid on Ushant, which will connect the production to the consumption in order to reach 100% renewable target in 2030. Thank you for your attention. I came to the end of my presentation of Ushant, and I will now let Sébastien for the rest of the presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Gwenda, for your presentation. I will let Helen and Peter take the lead from the University of Exeter for the second part.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Sebastian. We're just moving on to, we're just sharing everything with you and just trying to get it in the right mode. So there we go. My name's Peter Connor. I'm an Associate Professor of Sustainable Energy Policy at the University of Exeter. I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Helen Smith, who is an expert on resource assessment and wave energy. So we're going to start with a very, very brief overview of the theory that underlay the sort of approach we've taken. So one of the things we're charged with doing on ICE was to come up with a general methodology that other islands and remote communities will be able to take off the shelf and actually run through the process themselves. To try and make that as friendly as possible. We've done that, but we've also then there's a lot of theory that underpins it. And we've taken that out and put it in a separate document. Both of those are available along with the Ushant specific case study from our project website, which you should be able to see on screen now. So do feel free to drop in and pick that up. I'm only going to touch, as I say, on theory briefly. So there's a lot of different approaches that we could have taken in terms of looking at different integrated resource planning approaches to how we would deal with Ushant and how we would come up with a worthwhile general methodology. We settled on a specific one, which was the action-oriented playbook, which is we felt was, after a literature review, was the right approach to take, given what we were trying to achieve and given that we're trying to sort of encourage people to take specific actions to move forward. That playbook has 7 key stages, which are on the screen. I'm not going to read through all of them. There's a lot more about this in the documents that I've mentioned. We're trying to get to the case, back to the case study. But this gives you an idea of the kind of stages that we're going through. And that led to us coming up with this general approach. This is essentially the sort of foundation of the ICE methodology that we've published. You can see it's a multi-stage process. It's an iterative process. There are multiple places where you do something and then you go back and review it and move it forward again to try and come out with the best option. You can see we start with setting out the objectives and working out what the island actually needs, and then we look at things like energy demand. We look at what the current options are and what the potential resources are on the island. We also have to consider things like reliability. So at the moment, Ushant, for example, relies on diesel. It is pretty reliable. There's a lot of backup in the system, and there's a new storage system involved there as well. And we didn't want to impact that reliability negatively when we made the shift over to renewable energy. And when we've done that, that informs some scenarios, and those scenarios are fed back in terms of not just the technical solutions, but also whether they're acceptable to the community on the island as well. And then once we have scenarios, the idea is that that feeds into the process of implementing the actual project on the island. So fairly simple. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in those reports. What it led us to as well was 7 key points that I'm just going to cover, and this is the bulk of my brief presentation. 7 key points, which is one is pretty obvious. We're at the point where some of the new technologies, the new energy technologies, wind and solar particularly, are getting to the stage where they're now competitive. So a lot of islands that are off the grid have been relying on diesel generation particularly, and that's expensive because of the small scale, but also because of having to constantly import diesel. That tends to be an expensive technology. As solar has got cheaper, as wind has got cheaper, then they've been able to challenge the actual economics of energy systems on islands. And so it's essential to consider those. Second point, and one we were very big on, and one was really at the heart of what we were trying to do, was to work with local communities. So any new energy system is going to have to meet the needs of that community, and the community has to be engaged with it. And this is obviously, and I'm sure a lot of people listening have already come to this conclusion themselves, and this is well established. Next 2 points are basically about the fact that one of the ways to get the community on side is to show long-term economic benefits. That might be energy cost reductions, which isn't necessarily going to apply in Ushant, but it might also be that working with technologies that aren't going to impact reliability, maybe working in energy efficiency, which is going to may lead to a cost saving. But if people can see that local companies are benefiting, that all of the benefit isn't going to somebody who lives 500 miles away, then that tends to change attitudes. And linked into that is one of the benefits that can be created on the island is to train people to have the skills to operate and maintain the technology, maybe have some ownership of the technology as well. That can really foster more positive engagement with the changes that have been made. And that leads us into the 5th point here, which is the different business models. It may be that having, where it's possible, where national policy allows, then it may be possible to have people who own a share of energy generation and supply on the island. You do have to be realistic. Not every island is going to have the resources to be 100% renewables, but it's certainly not impossible. You could come with scenarios of 40 or 70% or whatever it is, and have that as a partial solution rather than having no low carbon solution at all. And then other things have got to tie into that. You should be considering energy efficiency. Whenever you consider renewable energy, you should be considering energy efficiency, working with the communities again to try and reduce the demand so that you have to spend less on new generation capacity. Going back to our methodology, stage 1 was to set objectives. And on the island of Ushant, we're quite lucky that we were started off with objectives that are already in place. There are plenty of objectives you can see on this slide. I'm not going to read through this list either. There are plenty of potential objectives whenever you're approaching reinventing an energy system. Ushant, we were in the position that the island had already decided, the community had already come together, as Gwendol mentioned, and was already agreed that they wanted to work to 100% renewables by 2030 and 50% by 2023. So we're able to approach it in that context and already have that very positive viewpoint. We also had a separate specific challenge, which was trying to integrate the tidal turbine that Gwendol mentioned into the island's energy system and to build around that. And that strongly influenced our choices for scenarios. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to my colleague now, who's our Renewable Energy Resource Assessment expert, Helen Smith.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to focus now onto the more specific challenges for Ushant in terms of defining energy scenarios to get to that 100% renewables by 2030. Starting off with the technology assessment, the aim of which is to identify viable technologies in order to develop these scenarios. And the approach we took was to look at all the potential technologies available and then work through the constraints. So starting off with assessing resource constraints, making sure there is an appropriate resource available before we move any further, then moving into looking at technical constraints. So what's it technically feasible to actually deploy on the island? And then we move on to some of the more environmental and policy issues. What kind of environmental constraints might there be? Heritage constraints that would put restrictions on what can be done with certain technologies, and the social and political, which might relate to public opinion on the island, and it might relate to political objectives, regulatory barriers, and so on. So this process takes us down to essentially where you can see the dotted line on this diagram. We're not aiming for a very specific assessment at this point. We're not looking at specific sites, specific devices, but we want to get to a point where we have a generalized assessment where we can start to combine different technologies and look at how the combination of different technologies can contribute to an overall energy solution. So our starting point was to consider the potential technologies. You can see the 6 key technologies that we were looking at here on the screen. Tidal was a given for us because of the Sabella development. So everything we've done has looked at how that can be incorporated. Onshore wind is a proven technology. Islands typically have excellent wind resources, so we were very keen to include this despite the potential challenges in terms of the consenting process for that. Solar, there is already, as you've heard, a solar development on the island, and so we're looking at how the solar deployment can be expanded. Offshore wind was something we considered. Offshore wind is a rapidly expanding technology that offers huge potential. The challenge we've got here is that the energy production would far exceed the demand on the island. So without an export cable, it really isn't a viable technology in terms of the costs associated. Wave was an option with the location of the island and the wave resource. It is a fantastic renewable energy potential technology. However, at present, it's still really commercially unproven. So for the purposes of our assessments, we considered the risk to be too great to include this as a core technology. Finally, we had the option of biomass from organic waste. Again, great potential there, but we considered that there just wasn't sufficient waste available on the island to make this a realistic proposal. So that left us with the 3 technologies that we wanted to consider, and then 3 technologies that we've eliminated for the time being. Moving on to the specific assessments then, starting off with solar. As expected, we ran the numbers through our software, PVSYST, and it demonstrated an expectedly good level of resource. It's very predictable given the latitude. The issues we have here is that the lower resource occurs during the winter months, and these are the times when the demand is higher, as you've seen in Gwendal's presentation. Similarly, in winter, peak usage occurs in the hours of darkness, in the evenings when people get home from work and so on. And this is the time when there's no generation because it's dark. So whilst solar offers huge opportunities, it does require either behavioural change in terms of when people are using energy, but also energy storage solutions. Ushant has a benefit in terms of the traditional design of the buildings on the island. So the majority of the rooftops on the island have roofs that are pitched at 35 degrees. This is very close to the optimal angle of 36 degrees for maximum irradiance. So it certainly makes rooftop solar a very viable proposition here. Our starting point was to look at municipal rooftops. There is the existing 45 kilowatt plant on the roof of the sports hall, which was installed in 2017, and several other proposed projects looking at other municipal buildings on the island. A range of scales of deployment there. In particular, the technical service buildings offer 3 different potential installations going up as high as 113 kilowatts. You can see what the generation from each of these proposed plants would look like over the course of the year. So again, we're still seeing by far the higher levels of generation during the summer months. The problem is when we come to look at this in terms of the context of the overall energy demand on the island. So you can see that from these municipal projects, actually the overall contribution to the demand is relatively low. In fact, it's very low. So clearly municipal building solar on its own isn't going to make a significant contribution, but it will still make a contribution. So from that, we needed to expand our assessment. We moved on to consider other rooftops on the building on the islands. So over 1,000 other rooftops were identified across the island using a GIS mapping approach that had appropriate space and orientation. The consistent roof pitch of 35 degrees has certainly helped this. However, there were technical constraints that had to be considered. For example, the age of the buildings. Many of the buildings on the island are over 100 years old, so therefore would require structural assessments before any panels could be installed. There are also issues relating to the size of the electrical supply infrastructure. However, the other constraints for rooftop installations were relatively minimal. There would be more restrictions and regulations if we were looking at ground-mounted solar. So we did keep our focus on this rooftop solar initially. We made an assumption that 20% of the available rooftops on the island could have solar installations, and this produced a model that could offer 59% of the total demand available. So if we go back to looking at potential generation compared with the demand, you can see now we're seeing a much more significant contribution. And if you look at those green lines, the difference, anytime the green line is above zero, that essentially means we're meeting or exceeding the demand on the island. However, there is still considerable deficit in the winter, so this highlights the need for developing these energy storage solutions as well. Moving on to the wind energy assessment, we started off again performing our resource assessment using data from the airfield on Ushant. This is relatively coarse data. It doesn't give us the variability across the island, for example, but it's sufficient to show us that there is definitely a viable, in fact, a very good resource available there for wind turbine development. Wind also has an additional benefit in that the availability of the resource much more closely matches the demand profile on the island. So the strongest winds, therefore the higher levels of generation occur during the winter months, and then it drops off accordingly in the summer. So in theory, wind should be a very good fit. However, it does come with additional constraints. So actually finding a site to develop a wind turbine can be quite challenging. Any site needs to be a safe distance from roads and buildings. It needs to have access for large construction vehicles, and it needs to have a cable into the grid. There are also some more socioeconomic constraints, in particular poor public opinion relating to wind, going back to a failed project back in the 80s. And there would also be significant planning challenges relating to the unique natural environment and likely NGO opposition to this as well. However, we proceeded with the assessment. We considered 3 potential wind turbines ranging from a small 300 kilowatt turbine with a maximum hub height of 47 meters up to a significantly larger 2 megawatt turbine with a potential hub height of 105 meters. And we can again see what that looks like in terms of the potential power production compared with the overall demand. So you can see the 300 kilowatt turbine, a single turbine on its own at the bottom there, still is giving us a significant deficit. Whereas by the time we get up to the 2 megawatt turbine, you can see we're bringing in quite a significant contribution there. And then finally, we move on to the tidal energy assessment. If you were starting the tidal energy assessment from scratch, tidal in many ways is the most constrained. There are huge numbers of technical constraints in terms of existing infrastructure on the seabed, water depths, types of seabed and so on. And there are also significant environmental constraints in terms of the various environmental designations and so on in the region. However, fortunately, we already have the consented and operational Sabella site available. So we focused our investigations here on the resource. You can see on the left-hand side there, working through the tidal cycle, how the level of resource varies. And in particular, we're interested in the channel that you can see to the southeast of the island here. And this point A is where the site of the is where the Sabella installation is currently sited. So it's in a channel with a very strong tidal resource. So we focused our efforts on that. We did also investigate a second site, Site B, which also met the constraints, and it gave us an alternative and the potential to look at a second tidal turbine generation as well. So if we look at what this means in terms of overall production, tidal is an interesting resource. It's very predictable, and in its kind of predictability, it is consistent across the year. There's no seasonal bias there at all. However, it is intermittent. So it sees daily intermittency in terms of the 2 high tides and 2 low tides a day. And it also sees this more fortnightly intermittency as we move from spring tides to neap tides. So while it does provide a very good level of production and a very consistent level of production in terms of its predictability, because of this intermittency, we would need very well-developed storage solutions to go alongside this. So you can see some of the numbers that we calculated down at the bottom of the page there. So this takes us through to our scenario development. So we took all the information that we'd gathered as part of the assessment studies, and we developed 7 potential scenarios looking at different combinations of these technologies and different scales of installation of these technologies. So looking at either very basic municipal solar installation, extending out to the extensive solar on 20% of all rooftops, looking at the different sizes of turbines, looking at inclusion or exclusion of the tidal turbine. And down the right-hand side, you can see how each of those different scenarios are actually meeting the overall demand on the island. Some of the solutions, scenario 3, for example, massively exceeds the total demand. However, this only occurs at parts of the year. If we actually look at comparing the winter and the summer seasons, you'll see we're massively exceeding demand in the summer, but we're still seeing deficits in the winter. So here are just some results from 2 of the scenarios, the first 2. The general conclusions that we were able to draw from this is that firstly, widespread domestic rooftop solar installations are going to be required in order for the island to meet the energy targets. They were the ones that really contributed most to the overall picture. Wind energy is going to be important potentially. The availability matches the demand profile the best and goes a long way to helping balance this generation and demand. However, we recognise that this is going to be more problematic in terms of actually progressing any projects. We are going to require energy storage solutions. We do have, regardless of the solution, there are going to be periods when we're producing excessive demand, and there are going to be periods when we see greatly reduced demand, and energy storage can help to balance this out. And we would also have to consider that wind solution, particularly larger turbines, might well lead to the need for curtailment in very strong winds when we see excess generation. So that's it from the technology case study. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Phédeas, who's going to take you through the public participation.
Well, actually, Helen, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for your speech. Actually, before going to Phédeas, we're having some interesting questions. So please stay online, because there is a question I think you could also answer from Anna, who's asking, how is the impact of Ushant in national policies? It means, or is it the other way around? For example, are experiences or problems having an impact? I think it is a really interesting question to see what is the link between, what we're doing on the island, what are the impact on national policies and regulations.
Yes,
You
can answer,
Peter,
and Gwendal also can answer.
Absolutely. I'm going to pass back to Peter for this one, because this is very much his area.
Helen? So I couldn't hear what's just been said. So, oh yeah. So the policy question that Hannah placed in the chat. Yeah, there was a very specific issue that arose, and I think it's very specific to the policy of the national policy of France and how it relates to the islands. And I think it does emphasize how you have to consider local policy variations in terms of local, regional, and national policies. So basically, France has a policy that all French citizens pay the same amount of money for a unit of energy. And the impact of this is that on an island, you would normally expect the cost to be quite high. And the actual real world cost of generating power from diesel energy on Ushant is about 40 to 45 euro cents per kilowatt hour. But the consumers on Ushant don't pay that. They pay the same that everybody else pays. So whether you're in Paris, or whether you're on Ushant, or whether you're in La Réunion in the Indian Ocean, you pay the same amount per unit of electricity. And the upshot of that is what would normally be potentially beneficial. So if you go somewhere where the costs are basically paid by the local consumers, then coming in with a new renewable energy technology that potentially reduces their unit costs is very attractive. but because they're effectively already subsidized by the wider French state, that incentive isn't necessarily there. And actually one of the things that it does emphasize the importance of energy efficiency on Ushant, because that is something that leads to a real cost reduction. And so yeah, I think that is going to be a potentially quite important, because you don't have that really, in terms of moving to renewables, you don't have that potential to capture those real world cost drops. I do have to be very careful how I approach this as well, in terms of talking about looking at the sort of wider French picture on energy regulation wasn't really within the scope of the project, but we do wonder whether the incentives for the utilities that are involved are maybe creating some effects that we would probably prefer not to see in terms of overall cost reduction.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this interesting answer. We've been talking a lot about technologies, focusing on what we've done on Ushant. And now we have some other questions, really interesting question about social dimension of the energy transition and behaviors, social behaviors. So this is a really good question, and I will let Phédeas to speak about it, because this is the objective of this part now of the presentation.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thanks for this excellent overview of the technical side of things. But as you've said, we're thinking of the energy transition in Ushant in socio-technical terms as well. So my work on the ICE project focuses on aspects of consumer engagement and public participation and acceptance of the new technologies introduced on the island. So basically, a critical starting point of my work on the ICE project is the acknowledgement that the social dimensions of energy transitions risk being overlooked in favor of a technocratic vision in which the technical natural sciences take sole responsibility. Recent debates on how to manage island energy transitions have been curiously silent on democratic matters, despite their potential implications for democracy. Against this backdrop, my work pays special attention to Ushant's energy publics. We focus especially on the development, production, acceptance and use of technologies by individuals in society, and more broadly, on the role of energy publics in the energy transition. These understandings might appear quite radical to the technocrats amongst us today, but it is increasingly apparent that it is no longer possible to operate in secluded settings where public interest or social utility can simply be assumed. Indeed, some have begun to suggest that we live in an age of participation, epitomized by the redistribution of expertise and attempts to incorporate a range of actors into processes of decision-making. As Chilvers and Kearns characteristically assert, from a position of relative obscurity, public relations with and understandings of science, accompanied by institutionalized practices designed to move and govern publics, have become a characteristic feature of modern statecraft. So much so that it is now difficult to find processes of decision-making on science and environmentally related issues that are not accompanied by any forms of public participation and engagement. There are three main rationales for involving the public in energy transition, such as the one currently happening in Ushant. First of all, there's a strong instrumental rationale, an argument that high effective participation makes technocratic decisions more legitimate by restoring public credibility, by refusing conflicts, by justifying decisions, and by limiting any future challenges. There's also a substantive rationale. Non-experts see problems, issues, and solutions that experts miss. Therefore, it's quite important to also acknowledge these locally specific knowledges and sensitivities. Finally, there is this normative rationale for involving the public in energy-related decision-making. It's all about democratic ideals, calling for maximum participation, allowing for everyone affected by the decision to have an influence. So, experience of involving islanders in energy transitions has helped us develop a sound understanding of what works well and less well when engaging the public. On the one hand, experience from island energy transitions across the globe suggests that the public can effectively engage in process of innovation when certain contextual, procedural, and objective related issues are well thought through. Indicatively, we can have meaningful public participation when projects and interventions are driven by local actors and priorities, when there is pre-existing experience and institutional commitment to public participation and to public empowerment, when participation activities are managed well and properly, when participants themselves are willing to participate and compromise, when the objectives of policymakers, project developers, and host communities perfectly align, and finally, when there is both an instrumental but also a substantive and normative commitment to participation. On the other hand, however, our research on multiple local case studies uncovers a plethora of shortcomings when engaging with the public. Project teams fail to appreciate local context and develop suitable participation methodologies. Also, there tends to be a prioritization of national level interests that leads to the marginalization of local perspectives. There's often typically limited upstream participation and subsequently a premature closing down upon specific solutions. There's also, it's quite common to have tensions in the priorities between project developers and host communities. Finally, there tends to be a prominent instrumental rationale for participation that focuses solely on legitimizing expert decisions in place of empowering the public. But how exactly do we go about engaging the public in Ushant? How does our approach compare against island transitions elsewhere? How have we managed to effectively engage the public? Or do we encounter the same challenges encountered elsewhere? The remainder of my talk explores these key questions, describing and evaluating public participation in Ushant's energy transition to open up, hopefully, discussion on meaningful public participation in islands' energy transitions in general. So, to start with, against the backdrop of public participation agendas that fail to engage the public at an upstream stage of project development, Ushant's energy transition seems to manifest itself as one that is particularly democratic, with locals themselves initiating the transition. The journey of public participation in Ushant's energy transition began almost 20 years ago. The trigger was, as we've heard earlier on, the need by EDF to replace some generating capacity. Environmentally conscious local citizens were well aware of this, and alongside Ushant's mayor and stakeholders from Conciergerie Générale de Finistère, wanted EDF to invest in a renewable generating capacity rather than simply replace the traditional fossil fuel-based units. A decade later, and on account of significant technological developments, the system and its stakeholders finally start to respond to these calls, providing a fertile ground for the initial mobilization of local citizens to grow. This brings us to the third and arguably most important phase of public participation in Ushant's transition, the introduction of a whole host of sustainable energy technologies on the island made possible through the ICE project and the simultaneous systematic engagement of Ushant's energy publics. Now, the fact that it took almost 2 decades for Ushant to take important steps towards energy supply decarbonization highlights multiple problems encountered in this process. Whilst locals were eager to initiate a sustainable energy transition in the 2000s, the system just wasn't ready for this, and the mobilization was thus ineffective. Initially, locals encountered a systemic lock-in, with local interests unable to inform decision-making. Specifically, in spite of widespread support for a sustainable energy transition by local actors, this was not possible at the time in light of significant barriers to action. Renewable technologies were still immature and prohibitively expensive. EDF had no interest at the time in promoting renewables and had not yet developed a climate change mitigation agenda. And finally, local legislation designated a large part of the island a protected landscape area and forbid building any renewable energy plants at a distance less than 100 meters from the shore. And even when technological and political developments made a transition more likely, the political agenda was still dominated by the bigger opportunity at the regional and national level. And thus, a localized energy transition for Ushant was not prioritized by those with decision-making power. The ICE project might have finally brought this transition closer to fruition, but unfortunately, we haven't really managed to empower locals either, at least not to the extent we would have hoped to. On the one hand, we have focused our efforts on engaging diverse energy publics from across different age groups and backgrounds. This involved, first of all, the systematic consultation of the public at critical stages of product development through the distribution of questionnaire surveys. We have also invited expressions of interest and have involved interested householders in the emerging smart grid network. We have also focused on disseminating information leaflets detailing our work on the island. And we have also organized multiple public workshops and meetings to present up-to-date information on the product and inspire locals to play their part in Ushant's energy transition. We have also focused our efforts on organizing a flagship exhibition, making full use of audiovisual technologies and involving locals in a series of games and interactive activities focusing on Ushant's sustainable energy transition. On the other hand, however, a critical evaluation of our work in Ushant uncovers a rather tokenistic approach to public participation, whereby locals are mostly unable to affect project outcomes. Whilst locals were the ones who inspired the transition in the first instance, a truly just, responsive, and democratic transition would include citizen control or delegated partnership in decision-making. With locals not having a say over specific technologies, deciding of new infrastructures, etc., our work on the island mainly focuses on informing and consulting the public about technocratically developed solutions. Ushant thus manifests itself as a typical case study of public participation in island energy transitions. Experience from islands across the globe suggests that it is quite common for participation to remain rather tokenistic. Of course, this is not to say that all islands follow the exact same path and the same way of engaging with the public. For example, whilst multiple local case studies fall somewhere towards the middle of the scale of citizen control, just like Ushant, there are also several inspiring examples, such as Samsø in Denmark, that manifests itself as an exemplary case study of empowering energy publics in sustainable transition processes. Specifically, our project accounts for local needs, and there is an alignment of local and developer interests, with practically everyone being unequivocally supportive of the renewable and smart grid technologies we have introduced on the islands. We have also used various types of media to provide information, and locals are able to choose the exact form and duration of their engagement in the energy transition process, either as somewhat passive participants in public meetings or as active users of our smart grid solutions. However, several contextual, procedural, and objective related issues undermine efforts for truly meaningful participation. First, we as a project consortium have predominantly adopted an instrumental rationale for participation, namely seeking to maintain public credibility, diffuse any conflicts, justify decisions, and limit any future challenges to implementation by creating a sense of ownership. Second, with the ICE project essentially building on past work of the Merific project and Sabella's work on tidal energy, we have essentially been forced to follow a specific transition pathway with limited scope for upstream public engagement prior to committing to specific technological solutions. The predominantly decide, announce, defend approach we adopted was thus somewhat of an inevitability. Third, and perhaps most importantly, we encountered significant social barriers to participation. No matter how willing product developers are to engage the public, participation ultimately depends on the public themselves. Several locals were not willing whatsoever to participate in our events and workshops, arguing, amongst others, that they didn't have the time capacity, expertise, know-how, or sufficient interest to attend. The fact that we organized several activities and the prolonged 20-year transition process also contributed to participation, overload, and fatigue among a specific segment of the local population. Whilst their initial failed attempts to instigate a sustainable transition informed a relatively common feeling that their participation is not particularly important, that they would just waste time learning all the details about the project without much scope for either changing anything or of utilizing all the information disseminated. The two graphs summarizing key findings from a questionnaire survey carried out in December 2019 and involving 10% of the local population are quite telling of how locals are overwhelmingly supportive of sustainable energy solutions on the one hand, but considerably less interested in active or upstream participation. Specifically, the graph you see on your left-hand side demonstrates that up to 78% of participants in our survey had not attended any events concerning Ushant's energy transition. Quite similarly, 50% of the local population are not interested in adopting a community energy approach to the management of Ushant's energy system. Even when individuals were interested in community energy, they remained unwilling to participate at an upstream stage or in decision-making and management, overwhelmingly arguing that this is something the local municipality should initiate and manage without really involving the lay public. Hence, we might argue that our approach to public participation in Ushant was both inevitable and contextually appropriate. This somewhat tokenistic model of participation we followed is appropriate given local circumstances and local interests and preferences. Even if we did invest considerable time and effort to empower the public, this just wouldn't have much of an impact. The wider context of Ushant's transition is unconducive of this, and locals wouldn't be interested in supporting our efforts in a more active manner, even though they are overwhelmingly supportive of the sustainable energy transition. So this brings us to 4 key conclusions when it comes to public participation in Ushant and in islands across the globe. First, it's quite obvious, I think, that complete energy democratization and upstream public participation is obviously ideal, but might be unrealizable in practice. A whole host of issues, such as those encountered in Ushant, might undermine even the most ambitious participation agendas. Secondly, and related, arguably suboptimal forms of participation could be the only option. But they should still remain an option and should be prioritized by project and technology developers. Even when participation doesn't fully empower locals, it does, at the very least, legitimize and justify decisions, or even inspire action at the individual level. And this is something we have witnessed in Ushant as well. Third, we believe that effective public participation involves adopting contextually appropriate techniques rather than best practice guidelines, because these aren't applicable globally. It involves responding to local interests and respecting engagement cultures. Fourth, and finally, and more broadly perhaps, experience from Ushant confirms the need to think of energy transitions in socio-technical terms. For ultimately, our projects and important elements of their development depend on social factors, especially when we expect host communities to use our smart grid equipment and actively support or inform energy transitions. So that's all from me on the social side of things. Back to you, Sébastien.
Thank you very much, Phédeas. Actually, we have lots of questions, and let me, just before letting Jonathan speak, let me ask a few questions. We have questions on the technology side. The first question I had was, it's really interesting result using 20% of all roofs. Built this intro new builds as a requirement. I don't know, maybe Gwendal, could you answer this question? And there's also another question, maybe on that part is, would EDF, or the French utility, continue to operate and maintain the power system?
Yeah, regarding the photovoltaic, in fact, I presented that the buildings are relatively old on the island. And so I have my slide here, but maybe you can look it afterward. But there are no new buildings since 2007. And I think it will not be the case. So it's not so, there are no new buildings. So it's better to focus on old buildings to install photovoltaic power plant on the roof. And moreover, it's the cost on the surplus on islands, because we need to import every materials. A study made by the Association of Islands show that there is a 40% increase in cost for every project on the Ocean Island. So this is why it's easier to work on old roof instead of new buildings. And regarding EDF, yes, it will be EDF that maintain and operate the system, because this is a particularity in France. On non-connected territories, EDF is the only producer and network operator. So in fact, if there is, for example, the photovoltaic plant on the sports hall roof, so this is it belongs to the SDEF, but we have to sell the electricity to EDF, and then EDF sell the electricity to all the clients. So yeah, EDF will be still the operator on islands.
Thank you very much, Wendell. Thank you, Phédeas. I have some more questions, and hopefully at the end we can ask this question if we still have some time. But for the moment, I will let Jonathan speak about our innovative approach and the value proposition for isolated territories.
Thank you very much, Sébastien, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Williams. I run a cluster organisation called Morin Southeast in the UK, and we're working in the ICE project alongside our partners in France, another cluster organisation, PMBA. And our focus is really on business engagement and the role that can play in making island energy projects viable. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've learned from the ICE project. And the most fundamental decision, of course, to move from concept to reality is to get that decision to invest in the energy system. And broadly speaking, there are 3 different communities that we need to be working with here. Clearly, there is a public authority and regulator role here, and we've seen that very clearly in Ushant, in conjunction with the societal and community pressures. But you also need an organisation that can actually build and operate the system, which on Ushant is EDF in terms of operation, but in many other islands you wouldn't have quite the same situation there. And then you need an organisation which will actually provide the finance to construct and make the capital investment, and to secure some sort of return for that. Again, not so much the case on Ushant as it happens, but on many other islands you would have a requirement to raise the finance either from public funds or from private funds. So those are the communities that we need to be working with. And when we start diving down into the motivation for those stakeholder groups, there are a number of very clear drivers that we can identify. The first has been already mentioned quite extensively in this session, which is the cost, and typically around 0.5 euros per kilowatt hour, slightly less on Ushant. In other islands, it can be slightly more. But the important point is, there are two important points to make here. The first is that is usually a lot greater than mainland costs, sometimes an order of magnitude greater. But also it's higher than many of the renewable energy generating costs that we might want to introduce. So there's an opportunity there to save money. Secondly, the regulatory aspects. Many countries now, and certainly it's the case within Europe, will have carbon reduction targets. And what we do on islands can be making contributions to achieving those targets. And those can be national, but also they can be local targets in terms of things like air quality. And finally, environmental concerns, which were particularly visible on Ushant, but I think are becoming more and more the case around the world. Citizens really do value sustainability, and not only sustainability in a global sense, but also improvement of their own local environment. So multiple motivations, and the trick is to consolidate these motivations into a strong case for investment. Once you've got the case for investment, the question is, well, how do you actually make this happen? This is an example, actually not from Ushant, but from another very interesting company, Vattenfall, who have done a number of island energy schemes. What's interesting, but they're a turnkey contractor, so they will take responsibility for building the system and for raising the finance to finance that investment. So an interesting approach. What is also interesting in this particular example shown on the right-hand side of the slide, this is actually applies to an island in Sweden. And it does have a grid connection, but a very unreliable one. And so they have to engineer a system which would offer reliability of supply to citizens on the island. What is also interesting, I think, is the integration of very large loads in a demand management sense. So they've got heating and cooling being managed proactively, as Gwendal was describing the plans on Ushant. They've also included electric car charging as potentially a major load on the system, which is amenable to demand side management. So some interesting ideas emerging from that. In terms of operation, it's possible that this can operate through a community interest company, and a very good way of enhancing local stakeholder engagement. And as we've heard, resilience is important and can often be improved by smart energy systems. So pulling together those points, we can start to draw some conclusions on the business case here. Firstly, the one about saving money. It's very clear compared to diesel electric. There's a very strong business case for introducing renewable generation and smart grid systems. Secondly, there's enough price advantage or cost advantage in new forms of generation to actually make the capital project investable. So the revenue streams will be sufficient to justify private sector investment, or private and public sector investment. But in addition, we've got the very substantial socioeconomic benefits of reduced emissions, But also one thing we've looked at in quite some depth in ICE project is the opportunities for local business, both in the construction phase, but also in the operations and maintenance phase. And the reason we put a lot of attention into that is that having local businesses involved in these projects is a good way of nurturing the community engagement and community ownership of the project. So that's the reason why we want to do it. And I just want to make the final thing I want to cover really is how we've done that. We've adopted a value chain approach here, which in essence looks at the total range of activities for the project, all the way through from the very early stages of planning and deciding whether the project is viable technically and in terms of resource availability, right through to construction, through to operation and the delivery of tangible benefits to users and citizens. And the important point to make here is that this is a long-term supply chain opportunity. And we believe that there's plenty of opportunity for smaller companies, local companies and regional companies to be part of that process. The three main stages of business engagement in our experience are in the planning stage, where there's a lot of activity that needs to happen in terms of surveying and resource assessment. These are activities that, okay, university can do, of course. We've heard about Exeter's excellent work in this area, but also the scope for small companies to be involved in that. At the other end of the chain, we have the operation phase, which is particularly interesting because of the long period of time that we're talking about here. So small companies involved in, for example, maintenance of the system can see significant opportunity there, long-term opportunity for jobs and so on. In the bit in the middle, which is the procurement for constructing the system, can potentially bring in a good range of equipment suppliers. And if we drill down into that part of the value chain, we can see quite a good range of different types of equipment needed to be procured, both the generation side, which we heard a lot about, the rooftop solar. The installation of these systems is ideally suited to small local companies. Distributed storage, mentioned flow batteries, interesting area that we happen to be looking at. And the kind of smart systems behind the meter, domestic systems, which can, again, we heard about a little bit from Gwendal about how they're proposing to do that, and Ushant, and demand management facilities to allow demand shifting, particularly in areas of strong demand, like in heating, and in hotter climates, cooling is a very significant demand. So what we've done in ICE is we've built a little community of businesses that are interested in supplying equipment and services. You can access this if you're a business and you're interested at the URL that I'm showing at the bottom of the slide. And here are some of the companies that have subscribed to that network. And they're generally local companies that have interesting expertise to bring to the project. So in conclusion, what we've done is we've shown that a standardized methodology, okay, with some flexibility to suit different situations on different islands with different regulatory regimes and so on, but some element of standardized methodology can help to streamline and de-risk the process of moving from concept through to reality. And in terms of justifying the investment, the value proposition, which can again draw on previous experience, can help to evidence the investment decision and also provide a framework for sharing that experience with other islands that might want to do the same thing themselves. So that's all I really wanted to say. Back to you, Sébastien.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for your speech. We still have some interesting questions, but we only have 10 minutes, and I need to make a conclusion. But maybe just before concluding, there's an interesting question from Nicholas regarding the seeds and regarding the possible replication of the solution. And because the conclusion is also dedicated to the replications, I think it's good to make the questions. The question is called panelists, and maybe I will ask Phédeas to answer, comment on applicability of this approach in seeds, such as La Réunion, Martinique. Phédeas, can you answer this question?
Yep, sure. Well, I think that what's crucial here is to understand that each specific island and islanders within each specific island have their own sensitivities, cultural backgrounds, traditions, engagement traditions, etc. So I think it's first of all important to develop a very good understanding of the social circumstances within a specific island, and then develop an appropriate participation agenda. So I would say that really it's not about replicating any specific best practice model to participation, but about being really contextually aware and sensitive of what's appropriate for specific islands. So yeah, in a nutshell, I would say that that's what's key, and that's the key global kind of message when it comes to public participation in islands. And this is especially true when thinking of kind of regional level differences as well. Some islands might, given because of their history and background and cultures, might have might be more willing to participate upstream at an upstream level. For instance, other islanders might be less willing to be involved at an upstream stage. So basically, it's all about understanding and respecting what's appropriate for each specific island.
Thank you very much, Phédeas, for these inputs. So let me please go through the general conclusion of our session. Yeah. Actually, I want first to thank all the attendees to participate to the session. Thanks also to the speakers. What we actually wanted today is, of course, give you a better understanding of Ushant, about the project, about the case study, about the solution, the methodology we've developed. Also share that the participation of the islander is very important in this project. But I think that what I would like to tell you now is that we would like to demonstrate, we want to demonstrate the potential of the solution for other islands. Yes, smart energy solutions do exist for islands. So on our side, what's next now? We've worked a lot on technologies, we are experimenting. Now what we want to do is disseminate. We want to share experiences. We want to foster the replication of the solution on the island. And that's why we've decided, and we take the opportunity today to launch a new club. We've called it the Ice Territories Club, so that first we can promote on the project. It means that all the islands all over the world can have some information and have some feedback about the experiences we've had. Second, if we share these experiences, we can better the solution. And it's fascinating because we've had lots of questions, lots of inputs on the chat, giving some really good ideas. And of course, if we share this, we can all together build better solutions. We've begun to test the methodology, and actually we've tested the methodology on 4 islands. We've developed 25 feasibility studies on other islands just to better understand how we can implement, how we can model and implement the solution on other islands. And at least we, of course, doing this, we can disseminate the service. What is the offer we have? We kind of actually want to build 2 kinds of membership in the club. The first one is a kind of club membership where you can access to the ice knowledge, experiences, have access to experts. And the second one is for territories who are willing to go, a bit deeper to understand the solution and test the methodology, the solutions, and and replicate it. Few reasons to join the club. Our first reason is, I think, very interesting, is you have access to a community of international experts. Not only the experts within the ICE partnership, within the consortium, where we have lots of people with a lot of experiences on the topic, but also with all the partners we have, and the what we've called, and Jonathan spoke about these companies before, the ICE Lab companies that are offering solutions within the ICE methodology and solution. We also offer a network of islands. Of course, it's interesting to join this network dealing with these specific topics and specific issues with different kind of solutions. You'll have a privileged contact on the project, able to discuss with this contact with different experts also on the project. You'll have access to studies, to the models we've developed, to the living experimentation, not only on Ushant, but also other experimentation we've done in the UK. And then, as I've explained, to the test of the methodologies, the feasibility studies that will give you lots of information and precious information to deal with this topic. And finally, something interesting, we're now understanding that, you know, creating a bigger network of island of companies help us also to access financing. And for example, at the moment, we are looking at new financing of the European Commission, new calls around energy solutions for islands. So, you know, joining this club can offer you really lots of opportunities and access to knowledge, experience, and financing. What do we ask to join the club? It's quite simple. Don't worry, we won't ask you lots of time. On the first level, we will have to take part to a few meetings, webinar. We think that we'll have in between 3 and 4 webinars from today until August 2021. Of course, we have some specific interactions and discussions between the partners and the club members that are interested in specific topics. We will ask you to mobilize stakeholders on the territories, understanding how you can implement or test the solutions we've developed. And of course, I mean, spread the word. I mean, if you've been interested, we also would like you to disseminate the project to other isolated territories. And a second level, for territories that have some more time and are really interested in spending times to participate, whether on opportunity studies, on testing the methodologies, this also will be possible. So that's it. The ICE Territories Club is officially launched. Here you have some contacts. You can get in touch with us, ask any question you want. We also have put on the website, you'll be able, on the virtual summit website, you'll be able to see a poll asking you whether you're interested or not in joining the club. Actually, we're interested in, of course, territories joining the club, and also we're interested in companies offering solutions that could join the ICE companies network. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for attending our session. I'm quite happy because I think we are on time with the schedule. It's nearly half past 12 for us here in France. I don't know if we have maybe 2 or 3 minutes to come up with some other questions. Just maybe to begin saying that we have an official website. I think that is in the chat, so you can access this website. You'll have access on the website to different deliverables, so do not hesitate to have a look through the website. It's of course available. Yes, great. The organizer says we have 5 minutes more for some questions. So actually, I'm gonna get back to all the questions I had put down. Yeah, a question regarding technologies. The question is the following: did the team consider the logistics of delivering and installing a large wind turbine on the island? I don't know if Gwendal or Helen, you could answer this this question, or Peter. Yeah, Peter, we don't hear you. Peter, you're muted.
So yeah, we did consider the particularly obviously when you get towards the 2 megawatt end. I think potentially the problem is not getting the wind turbine to the island. I think the problem is actually constructing the wind turbine because of the size of the crane that you need to have to actually be lifting the blades into place. So we did consider it, but at that stage we weren't really. In terms of putting the scenarios together, we weren't really keen on discounting something because of that. But yeah, I think another assessment of the scenarios, we'd have to consider that and whether it was a realistic ambition to be able to construct it at the larger scale.
Thank you, Peter. Gwendal, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just to add that, in fact, there is a project supported by the company named Accio Energy, and the name of the project is FAR, or Lighthouse in English. And in this project, they want to develop 500 kilowatt of photovoltaic plants, 2 tidal turbines, 50 kilowatt, 500 kilowatt each, and I think windmill. And the windmill will be 900 kilowatt. So it's rather a small wind turbine compared to actual one.
Thank you, Gwendal, for your answer. I'm checking on the other screen if we have some other questions we could answer. Yeah, actually, Helen mentioned storage a few times. And there was a question regarding the technology. What technology did we consider, and how does it change the scenarios?
Yeah, I'll just touch on that one really quickly. It's not not my area of expertise. There is some existing storage on the island, so there is an existing 1 megawatt lithium-ion battery, but some of our colleagues have been specifically working on this. I think the best thing, given the time constraints, is to point people towards the link that we put in the chat that has all the project outcomes on, because there's a detailed report that addresses both the storage solutions for the different scenarios and also goes on to look at grid reliability issues. So rather than me commenting on something that's slightly outside my area of expertise, I think that's the best place to direct anyone who's interested to.
Thank you very much, Hélène. I think we've come up to the end of this session. I want to thank you again, everybody, the speakers and all the attendees that had been able to take part to this session. We are actually at your disposal whenever you want to go further in and talk about, I mean, all the doubt, the questions you have. You can send us email. You can send us some your contacts through the Virtual Summit website. We also have some possible private sessions, so please do not hesitate to contact us. We'll be really happy to talk with you and go further in what we are all doing together. Thank you very much, and hopefully talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.